It was already the first week of January, but this January was different. Miles sat at his table looking at the Bible he got from his church, wondering, what am I going to do? See, he was convinced that in this book he was going to find what he was meant to do, what he was called to do. But he didn't know how. His church just said, read the Bible. Look at how everybody else found their calling. Do the same. So he tried. He went and he looked, pages upon pages, narrative after narrative, hero after hero. In every one of them, God seems to make the first move. God has an audible voice, if not a physical representative. He shows up to each of these people: Noah, Abraham, David, Gideon, Paul. And so he waits. And he waits. And he doesn't see a cloud opening and a dove descending. He doesn't see a light blind him and knock him off his path. He doesn't see anyone come. And he goes, why them and not me? See, Miles believes firmly that God can and sometimes does show up and speak audibly and make sure that the person he's talking to knows exactly what they're meant to do. So why not me? I don't know if you felt like Miles before, but if you're in that stage of trying to find out what God has brought you onto this earth to do, sometimes just looking at the Bible at face value can be discouraging because we see all these heroes who know exactly what they're doing. God has shown up in the way we want him to. Sometimes we don't take the full look to see what would it actually be like if God showed up and told me to do something I didn't want to do. Which is why today I think we're going to spend some time doing just that. We often use the word calling and we think we know what it means. We have lots of examples of people that we can look to. I'm going to get you to click it ahead because my clicker's not working. Here, we have quite a few people that we can immediately point at and say, I know what his calling is. I know exactly what he is meant to do. If you don't recognize all of those people, you at least recognize one of those people, and you could probably give a good answer for what they're called to do. But is it their calling or is it their destiny? Is there a difference between that? See, when we look in fiction, a lot of times that seems to be mixed up. And looking at our fiction, even something as allegorical as The Lord of the Rings can be, and we look at Frodo and we look at Sam, we go, I wonder if we can apply that. This is not necessarily the best way for us to figure out what it means to be called by God. And so we're going to jump into the Bible today, and we're going to look at somebody who gets a calling that cannot be denied. Somebody who gets that audible voice from God. And we're going to see how that works out for them. We're going to start in Exodus because, as my youth know, Exodus is chapter 1 of the Bible. We go through all the prologue, and now we are at chapter 1. Is this going to work for me now? Okay, go ahead and hit next. Apparently, I'm just going to be calling that out all day. We're looking at Moses. Moses shows up right at the start of chapter 1. We kind of need to know what's going on. We are bathed in Egypt at the start of the Bible. See, the end of the prologue of Genesis tells us that the people of God were brought into Egypt. They were given the best land. And then at the start of chapter 1, the Egyptian rulers forgot why these people are in the best land. And there sure seem to be a lot of them. And we get a tragedy that befalls, as out of paranoia, many, many Hebrew boys are killed. And our main character does not go by a Hebrew name. It is very possible he had one, but we stay with the Egyptian name, which is very interesting because Egypt ends up looking like an allegorical devil army quite a bit. In a lot of stories, and a lot of the memory of the Jews as we go to the Exodus, Egypt represents evil. And yet, because they are human, and because our main character has an Egyptian name, it is not pure evil. But what about Moses? Moses grows up Egyptian royalty. And yet, somehow he knows that he is not meant to be there. We see this when all of a sudden he sees a Hebrew being unjustly beaten by an Egyptian. Moses looks this way and that. He sees no one watching, and he goes, I will solve this injustice myself. Later, he sees Hebrews arguing, and he again wants to step in because he sees himself as somebody who has the ability to do something. If we think of Spider-Man, the new with great power quote seems to be a mantra in Moses' head. If you can do something and you don't, and bad stuff happens, it's your fault. That seems to be the way Moses is acting. But the Hebrews don't see him as their friendly neighborhood Egyptian prince. No, they remind him that he killed an Egyptian. So why would they be any different? Is Moses going to kill them too? So Moses runs away because he realizes his secret's out. His rash act of justice has come back to bite him. So he flees and he goes into the land of Midian, and he sees more injustice. Shepherds are coming and driving women away from watering their own flocks. And he stands up to this injustice, waters it, and the women go away, and he sits back down. The women go back to their father, and their father's like, you guys are always gone forever. How is it you're here early? This injustice has been happening for so long that their father is surprised. They tell him that an Egyptian showed up and helped him. And the father's like, then why did you come back without him? What are you thinking? Go back and get him. He did you a service. Let's do him one. And indeed, they do give him a service as he ends up getting married and having a couple kids. I'd say that's quite the payment. And he gets used to this life. He is now no longer Egyptian royalty. He's a shepherd. And he seems to be content until one day he encounters God. He gets to a mountain, and all of a sudden, there's a bush burning. You can go ahead and hit the next slide. Thank you. He sees a bush burning, and the bush is not consumed. And the way in which the Bible records this, Moses seems perplexed. He goes, oh, what a strange sight this is. A bush that's burning and not burned up. I wonder if I should investigate. There is this weird tone to the language that he uses right after we see that an angel of the Lord has descended. And that is why this sight is so strange. And then God speaks. Moses is not misunderstood. Moses does not think, oh, this is a weird voice in my head. No, God speaks out of the bush, and he says, take off your shoes, for I am God, and you are on holy ground. This is what a lot of us think we want. We want God to show up and encounter us like this. But Moses doesn't. Moses is happy with his life. And so he shows up here. And instead of putting the text on the screen, I want you guys to just absorb the story as I tell it. We can get lost when we try to look at the text and analyze the text. The Bible was originally meant to be spoken. So listen to the story as it comes. Moses is hiding his face. He's afraid to look at God. And God says, I have seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry. I know their sufferings. And I have come to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians. I'm going to bring them to a place where that is going to be a land flowing with milk and honey. They will be their own people. They will not have to be under vicious mastership. They will be free, and I will be their leader. I will be their God. And Moses goes, who am I? Who am I that I should go see the Pharaoh and lead these people out? So God says, I'm going to be with you. And this will be the sign. Your people will leave Egypt and they will worship me. I'm just going to stop there. Is that a comforting sign? I don't think it is. The sign is, have faith, you'll know that I was God and that everything you did was right when you have success. Man, that just pip and dandy right there. So Moses goes, all right, what should I tell them? Who should I say sent me? Who are you? Now remember, he's an Egyptian prince. As much as he may know about Hebrew, he knows about Egypt. Egypt has a pantheon of gods. He can't just say, a god told me that you should do this, because there's almost a phone book for these gods. The Pharaoh's going to want to know, what God? By whose authority? Do I care about this God? How powerful is this God? What threat is this God to me? Do I already worship him? Pharaoh is in the place of a God on earth. His whole job is to interact with the pantheon of gods. For somebody else to take that role away from him, that's serious business. So God says, I am who I am, which is he gives his name Yahweh. This is the covenantal name that he's going to make with Israel. Moses is like, okay, I got a name. What if the people suck? What if the people don't listen to me? I mean, it's all well and good for you to tell me to go tell them, but, they have to listen, right? Free will and all that. What if they don't listen? So a lot of your Bibles will highlight this section as God giving Moses powers. This is where we see throw your staff down and it becomes a snake. Pick the snake up by the most dangerous part of a snake, its tail, and it becomes a staff. Moses is told to stick his hand into his cloak. He pulls it out and he has a skin disease that makes his skin look white as snow and flaky. Often it's thought to be like leprosy. He puts it back in, he's completely healed. God says, if that doesn't convince them, take some water from the Nile and drop it on the ground, it'll be blood. By the end of that, the Jews will listen to you. Moses is like, okay. I suck. I'm not a good speaker. When I tried to mediate between the two Hebrews, it was not very effective. I suck. You made a bad call. And God's like, I gave you your mouth. I will put words in it. You don't have to worry. I'm not sending you to do you. I'm sending you to do me. I will speak through you. I've chosen you to speak through. And Moses says, yeah, that's great, God. I'm going to be okay with whoever else you send. The gall. See, this is one of the things about Moses. The qualifications that prepare him to be the leader of the Exodus. Number one is this strong sense of what justice is and an intolerance for injustice. The second is courage in the midst of crisis. Long-term courage, not there. But right now, the courage to go attack somebody and kill them, the courage to speak, stand up, to say to God, You're full of crap, God. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm terrified of you, but you don't know what you're talking about. I'm a bad choice. It takes a lot of courage. And God has been patient with him up until this point, but this is where God gets mad. And he goes, fine, you have a brother. He's a Levite. I'm going to let him speak for you. You're going to tell him what to say. You're going to do the signs, but I'll let you have your brother as moral support. Now go. On the one hand, this is a calling that we wish that we would get. It's clear, it's direct. There's not a lot of room for misinterpretation. But it's a terrifying calling. What the calling is for Moses is, I want you to leave your life of comfort. I want you to go to a place where you are being sought to be killed. I want you to face the most powerful man in the known world and tell him, let this giant group of people that makes you a lot of money and makes your public works a lot easier, I want you to let them go. I want you to let me take a significant portion of your taxable population and leave. I don't know if that hits a little bit more clear for what that translates to today. But it makes it, for me, a little bit more clear why this is such a big deal for Moses and why he does not want this. Now, I don't know if this is working yet. Yeah, there's a couple slides that we missed here. I made a little chart so we can kind of look at the arguments that God has with Moses. Like I said, who am I? He's reassured with success. The next one, who are you? The new covenantal name. It also comes with a promise that the Hebrews are going to plunder the Egyptians. They've been suffering. Now you are going to get rich as you get freedom. Moses says they won't listen. God gives them powers. Man, it'd be nice to have powers. Show off. But this isn't enough for Moses. Finally, we get to Moses's core argument, the real argument against doing this. I suck, try again. And it is not until this audacity to tell God, you're wrong, I'm a bad choice, that God has anger. He has patience all the way up until then. But now we have anger. And if this was it, this would not be helpful for Miles. Miles would still say, but God showed up. So, next slide. What do we do when the bush doesn't burn? How do we find a calling if God doesn't show up and make it clear for us? Do we even need a calling? See, I firmly believe God made each and every one of us with at least one calling. Something he designed us to do. Something that we are as qualified as Moses to be able to step into a situation and handle it like nobody else. That's the groundwork God lays for his calling. The second part of the calling is faith. We have to have the faith that we won't need to do it on our own. Because a lot of times we are not called to stuff we want to do. Make it way more easy if we were called to stuff we want to do. It would never be an issue. You get people, I'm called to sleep for 12 hours a day. Oh, great. I am called to eat hundreds of hot dogs in one sitting. Oh, great. Love that calling. That's not a calling God gives. When we look at all of the callings God explicitly gives through the Bible, none of them are things that are pleasant, things you would have done anyways. They are things that make sense for how you are fearfully and wonderfully made. They are things that use your skills that God has given you, your inklings, your feelings. When you find your calling, it makes sense. You are set up to do this calling, but it is never a calling that you would have chosen to do on your own because it's easy. There's a man called David Brenner that I found while digging into calling. And he is a spiritual psychologist. He has his degree in psychology. He does a lot of writing where he mirrors psychology and mixes it with spirituality. And he has 4 things to say about calling that to help us. Next slide. Number 1, our unique calling will be based on our gifts and abilities. It'll grow out of our deepest desires and will always involve some kind of response to the needs of the world. We discover our calling in community, not on our own. My temperament, my personality, my abilities, my interests, and my passions all say something about who I was called to be. And God wants us to follow and serve in and through our individuality. This hit because when I read this, I realized this was my calling. See, I was Miles. I spent a long time looking through the Bible, looking at these callings, wishing God would just show up. I would pray that God would just show up and give me a sign. I would bargain with God. God, I want to know if this is what it is. If it is, do this. If it isn't, do that. Nothing would happen. And I'd go, well, what does that mean? I followed my passions, passionate about music, passionate about kids. My desire for my calling was to be a musician who preaches from the stage through my music to give hope to kids who had lost hope. My care was for kids who were hopeless. My desire was to do that through music. And then, slowly, as I was in college, it became apparent that that was not what God had called for me. Slowly, I analyzed myself, and I looked at my ambitions with music and how none of them had panned out. And I looked at the core desire for my music being hurting kids. And I started to get this little tugging that said, you should be a pastor. And the voice was logical. As a pastor, you will directly impact kids that you wish you could from a stage. From the stage, you will always be removed. As a pastor, you can get directly involved. You can feed into the life of these hurting, broken kids. You can spread light and healing directly through broken people. But that didn't mesh with my plans. See, I was quite happy with my music plans. So I fought against it, just like Moses. I said, that doesn't sound like me. I hate public speaking. My brother's a good public speaker. You should send him. My brother is the biggest extrovert I've ever met. He'd be good for this. I'm way more comfortable with an instrument on. So I might talk a little bit in between songs while my guitar, my bass hangs off of me as my security blanket. You did wrong, God. But no, when I finally embraced that this was where God was calling me, I started to feel edified. I saw through my interactions with youth that this is what I was made to do. I feel whole when I minister to kids. Your calling will make you feel that. It'll be uncomfortable when you think about it, but when you do it, you will feel whole. You will feel that you are doing what you were designed to do. And that feeling is how we are assured of our calling. In order to do that, and not just have a just over broke that we go to, if we want to find our calling, it starts with us prayerfully looking at ourselves. What did God set us up with? What are our talents? What can you do that is super well? And how does that match to where your heart burns for this world.